All right. Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you guys are. Hey, hope you're doing well. I have a show. My favorite thing to talk to you about today is creativity, and we'll get into that in a second. I love seeing where you guys are. I see both Jareds are right up at the top here. Jared, our very own Jared, is. I guess you guys are having some storms in the Midwest. Pretty big time, right? It sounds like both Jareds are having those major storms. Yeah, anyway, so we're going to hear from Jared in our chat. Both Jareds, thanks guys for joining us. And hi, Yvette. Good to see you're here from England. How is it there? Not too crazy. We're just here on the coast of California. It's just cold and foggy, just kind of normal, everyday summer weather here. Okay, well, listen. As I go through this, I do want to hear from you guys as far as your questions, so make sure you're firing them away at me. Just leave them in here, and I'll get to them as I can. So let's get this party started. Okay, so here's what we got. We've got Marc Silber. I'm an author, educator, and photographer, filmmaker. I do a lot of things in Carmel, California, and our show today is brought to you by our friends at Bay Photo Lab. And here's the deal. You've heard me say this over and over again. I'll keep saying it forever and ever. The major thing with photography is you got to get prints made. You got to print your work, and Bay Photo Lab will help you do that. Right now, you get 10% off on anything. So if you've already ordered from them and you've used your 25% off discount, buy something else, 10% off today. Thin wraps, these are cool. You hang them on the wall. I've got one that I love. It floats off the wall. Doesn't require a frame. You know, sometimes you don't need a frame on a photograph. And when you have it in one of these thin wraps, it actually looks pretty cool. Wood products are interesting. I see a bunch of different products here you can get. Those are 20% off. And as always, you get 25% off on your first order. So you guys should head over there and get something. Okay, so hey, hello from Brazil. I love it. How is my dog? She is a doll. For those of you who don't know, if you've watched the AYP show, you've seen Shyla, our amazing golden retriever. Unfortunately, we lost her in December. She was almost 13 years old, which for a golden is really getting up there. And she hung in there as long as possible. But we lost her in December, super heartbreaking, just before Christmas. Where we live, about a few steps from here, there's a trail that leads up into this incredible, looks like Middle Earth in the woods. And you go about a quarter of a mile, there's this big redwood tree. And people put ornaments to their dogs on it. They call it the dog tree. So every year you put an ornament to either your past dogs or your present dog. Anyway, we sadly hung up her Frisbee on the dog tree on December 22nd, 2020, I think it was. So we had to wait. We waited until we found the perfect puppy, and her name is River. She's 10 weeks old, really super smart. I'm training her. Her sit is perfect. She walks on a leash. She's an amazingly smart dog. You'll see her around AYP a lot. Okay, so she's great. Thanks for asking. Jared says you have a wood product for Beth Ann's photo. Oh, that's cool. That's great. You know, I totally see a use for them, so that's a pretty cool thing. Oh, thank you. Don't forget to subscribe. You guys are ahead of me here. So subscribe and enable the bell because you don't want to miss any of our new shows. Listen, I had a long talk with Bob Holmes yesterday. He's super busy coming back from Washington doing a bunch of shoots in wineries, but he's super excited about getting out some new stuff. He just wrote an ebook that we're going to get out for you guys pretty soon. He's going to write some other ebooks. Dan Milner wants to do his show on called To Print. We're going to get that scheduled. There's a lot of stuff going on. I'm reaching out to other photographers, and we'll pick up with those guys. But today, we're going to talk about creativity. This isn't the first time I've talked about creativity, and it's not the last. And the deal is, I have written this book right here, and it's right on the cover there, called Create. And if you don't have it, look, I'm not trying to sell a book. I'm just telling you, I poured a lot of my life into this book. It was a result, probably the longest running research project of all my books, because I pretty much have researched it through my whole adult life and even as a kid. And you'll read stories about me in here, stories I've never told anywhere else. Like how I got electrocuted and fell out of a pine tree. Wow, how did that happen? I was, 12 years old, just been in a water fight. And I had this huge epiphany afterwards, kind of crazy. I don't advise you to go climbing pine trees when you're soaking wet, as I did, and then fall out of the doggone thing. But I did have, and I'll show you later here, one of the photographs that I captured as a result of that. But here's the deal. We're photographers. Now, photography is a creative activity. You cannot just separate one form of creativity from another. You are a creative person. You have maybe more than one area that you create in. All the great photographers that I'm aware of have more than one area that they were creative in. Ansel Adams had to make a choice in his career early on. He was studying to be a concert pianist, and then he discovered photography second to that and fell in love with it. But he took the sort of mathematical and very disciplined approach that he had towards playing piano, and he took that to photography. If you've ever read any of his books, you know he is very technical, very scientific, even though he had only gone as far as the 6th grade. Can you believe that? Seriously. He was completely self-taught. But he had these two disciplines that he basically merged together. He never stopped playing piano. And I want to encourage you to nurture other creative areas if you have those that maybe you've, like me, I park some of those behind. Don't do that. Like, I need to revamp my musical journey. I play blues harmonica, I play guitar, and I've kind of left both of those behind, and I need to get back to them. But let's take a look. Let's dive into creativity, not just as a photographic tool, but I hope to nurture the creativity within you. Okay, so what is creativity? I'm going to define it in a minute. And are there exact parts to it? Well, I asked myself that question when I started this research, and I found out there were. You will probably go, okay, Mark, you already talked about that. So what? Turns out there are 5 steps or 5 stages of creativity. And listen, in any scientific approach to something, you want to separate things out. You want to put them in separate categories because it becomes more understandable and more controllable. And there are definitely separate stages to creativity. And also, how can you strengthen it? Okay, so in addition to you guys subscribing, I would appreciate it if you like what I'm talking about. Hit the like button, because that does let other people know that we're on the channel here talking. So I hope to answer these questions for you. And if you have specific questions that you want to put in the chat, please do so. Yeah, Jared is saying that as a music major, I remember we talked about this, interacting with photography, I'm sure has made a huge difference for you. And you are very scientific in your approach to photography. Music is an incredibly mathematical art form. I mean, I suppose every art form you kind of break it down into the math of it, but music especially, just because of the notes and so forth. What is creativity? The Oxford Dictionary defines it as the use of imagination or original ideas to create something. Your imagination and original ideas to create something. And that's really what we want to spark here. I think the biggest challenge of photography or any creative activity isn't just the use of your tools. And yes, you do need to know how to use your tools, your camera, your lens, your lighting, etc. But behind the lens, who's there? And what are you using? What do you use to create with? You use your mind, right? It may be a spiritual activity to create, but you certainly use your mind and your mental power to imagine things. And like anything else, you have to exercise it. One of the things I'm reminded of raising this puppy is how playful not just puppies are, but babies and children are just into wonderment. They're like looking at everything with fresh eyes. And that's part of it. We have to do that. We have to get out and look at things, not because we've seen a sunset 10 million times or some other thing that maybe we're drawn to photographing. We have to look at things with fresh eyes. And that comes from using your imagination and having original ideas. So my goal for you, as always, is to help you kind of spark that and help you with your creative process. That's, again, why I wrote the book. And, it's like look around and see how you can spark your creativity. And I'm going to give you some tools to do that with. There are 5 stages of creativity, just like there's 5 stages of photography. And it goes like this. First of all, you have visualization at the center and the heart, just because that's in the definition that I just read you. It's using your imagination and using that ability to create new ideas. You get a vision for something. You get a vision for writing a book. I have a book that I'm in the process of writing called Forever Young. I mean, it's about 3/4 done. I have to just finish it. It's not an instructional book. It's a book about my various journeys as a photographer and my writing and stories and that sort of thing. But I've had this vision for a while. It's stuck because I need to make time. I don't have a publisher for it. I need to find a publisher. I need to wrap it up. But it's in the works. But it's my vision. It's an idea that I had. Whenever you take a photograph, Ansel Adams said the key to a photograph is your ability to visualize. You've maybe heard me talk about this in various different shows, but it's true again with any art form, including the art of living itself. Like, what do you want your living space to look like? What do you want your environment to look like? If you're cooking a meal, what do you want as an end result? Right? What's the vision that you have for that? I mean, that drives it. That drives every form of creativity. So you have your visualization. You have to know your tools and whatever tools you're using. As photographers, we're using cameras, we're using lenses, tripods, lighting. Those are your tools. You got to know them so well that, as Bob Holmes says, they don't get in the way of your photography. The biggest stumbling block that I see is too much fixation on cameras, or the other side of that is just not knowing them well enough. Listen, if you're fiddling with your camera, life is going to go like this. You're going to miss the shot. Don't think that visualization has to be a long, drawn-out process. It can happen in a split second. You see something about to happen. You go, wow, I better press the shutter right now. That's a visualization. It occurred in a millisecond. Or you could have it take place over a long period of time. Like, the moon's going to be up in a certain position. You get there ahead of time. You set up your tripod. That's all part of your visualization. You press the shutter at the right moment. Okay, visualization ties into all these other parts. So you got to know your tools. Then you got to get out there and work your craft. We're going to hear, if I have time, I'm going to play you this quote about that. You just want to keep working and let it flow. Don't stop the flow. Don't be a self-critic and shoot yourself in the foot. I know you guys have done that. Why? Because I do that, and it's a big mistake. Leave the criticism outside the door. Leave the criticism parked somewhere else and let it flow. Then you get into the stage called editing, and editing is super important, but that happens after you've produced your work. So we edit in filmmaking. We cut out the parts we don't want, we put the things together, we do all these transitions and edit in music and so forth. Same thing is true with still photography. We're editing. There's two definitions of editing. One is another kind of synonym for processing, although processing is more specific. Oftentimes we hear that in terms of processing. But it also means editing in terms of what sequence do you want your photos in, or what photos do you want in a certain story, or do you want left out of the story. That's also part of the editing process. And the final part of being creative is sharing your work. That's so important. Because if you leave it all stuck somewhere in your office, in your head, in your hard drive, in your phone, you're never going to feel the satisfaction that you get from sharing your work. And it can be, listen, putting your work out to the world can be a scary proposition. I was talking to somebody about this yesterday. You can be attacked and you will be attacked. It's not an if, there are trolls out there that love to just knock down creativity. Why? They're just wired wrong. They're wired down negative, not creativity brings you up, and they're afraid of anything creative, and they're afraid of creative people, and they just naturally, so you got to just know that. That's your 80-20 rule. That 20% out there will be on the negative side. 80% actually are on the positive side. So forget about those guys, okay? Put your work out. Make it known to the world. Share your work. Super important. All right. We've already talked about this. The whole key is visualization, and that means, by Oxford definition, the formation of a mental picture of something. You get the idea and form that idea. Here's what we use our hands, because we don't even want a camera necessarily when we're first visualizing. Walk around without a camera. Do this. You get an idea of how you want the frame to look, and it helps you visualize. But you can do that again with other art forms. You hear something. If you're a musician, maybe you hear something, right? And you go, wow, that could be a cool riff. Wonder if I could develop that. There's incredible stories about that. I should be able to get to one of them here. This is a picture of me, just kind of made up, of what a visualization looks like. You're getting this mental picture, you're putting it there, then you get your camera out and photograph it. Okay, so my first visualization came quite early. It's in this book. I told you about it. I fell out of this pine tree, and my friends were jumping off. We were going by the coast of California, and they were jumping off this sand dune. Now, I first shot their images from the side, and if you can see these, they weren't very interesting. These were just kids jumping up in the air over here. This one's kind of cool. Sadly, I've lost this negative. I cannot find it. It's kind of crazy. Fortunately, I made some good prints, and I scanned them much later. But these are the side views. This is a strip of 35 millimeter film. This one's kind of interesting, but this final one is the one that I really hung on to, and that's the one that you see back in this image here. So after I saw them, jumping from the side, I had this vision, why don't I get down below them and have them jump at a certain moment? Now, I directed this shoot, and honestly, I'd forgotten that I had, but one of my friends who wasn't in this told me, hey, Mark, this is what you did. You said, hey, you guys, come running towards me, and when I tell you to jump, jump. And I pressed the shutter at the right moment. Now, if I hadn't pressed the shutter just at that moment, if I was fiddling with my camera, if I was adjusting the shutter speed or doing anything, I would have missed this perfect arc here. And that's the beauty of this photograph. It goes in this arc, and it's very playful, and I was, I'd be one of the kids jumping if I hadn't gone through this shocking experience that you can read about in that book. But visualization can happen in a split second. This happened really fast. I I got the idea from the side, and then I thought, let me get down below them. It was perfectly silhouetted by the fact that the sun was going down behind them. Perfect silhouette. And when I went into the darkroom, by the way, I didn't originally print it as a silhouette, because you can see there's detail here. But then I had this idea, it might be really interesting to just get rid of all that detail and print it, which I did in the darkroom as a complete silhouette. So that's my first visualization. Visualization applies to all forms of art. This is Salvador Dali, amazing artist. He made art out of everything. And you can see over here, this is his studio. Over here, I don't know if you can see this, but these are wrappers that you use for light bulbs. It was amazing. He put them on the leg of a chair or something going upright. These are some of his paints and such. But you can use your visualization for any part of your art. Brian Wilson, Beach Boys. Okay, now he talks about how he completely visualized. So they're probably the most famous album is called Pet Sounds. And he completely visualized all these various instruments, even ones that we would never consider as musical instruments. A Coke bottle, sleigh bells. Listen to the song. Why am I blanking it? I'll think of it in a second. It's in that album. It's on the album Pet Sounds. Good Vibrations came out of there, which is considered one of the most amazing rock songs of all time. But he visualized everything in his head and then orchestrated. He had a studio band, studio orchestra, and he basically told them exactly what to do. That's another form of visualization. You could say, well, is there another term for it if it's auditory, like in music? Visualization doesn't just mean vision in terms of sight. It means getting the whole concept. So any art form you're using, you're still using your power of visualization. How do you strengthen your visualization? You go to museums. Now that the world is opening up again, I invite you to look around and see if there are museums open in your area. If there are, go there. I've interviewed so many photographers, and practically one for one, they told me their visualization was strengthened, their imagination was strengthened, their creativity was strengthened by looking at classical art. Joey L., you may be familiar with his work, amazing photographer, started off his career at age 16 as the photographer on the first Twilight film, and he's got an incredible career. But he told me, look, I go look at classical painting. I see how they framed, which means the use of canvas, how they lit it. Because what were those painters doing? They're looking at light. We talk about Vermeer lighting, which is a single light source, a single window, which is what I actually have here. I do have it augmented. This isn't classical Vermeer lighting because it's facing not north, it's facing south. Actually, it's facing west, and then I have an LED over here. So that's not a classical Vermeer, but, whenever you have a single light source, like coming through a window, which is very beautiful light, it's diffused, soft. You'll see that by going and looking at Vermeer's paintings. You look at Rembrandt, you'll see how he lit his work. If you look at these artists, man, they were so on top of lighting and composition. We can learn from them. You can get inspired. But it's not just painting that will inspire you. It's movies. It's music. Joseph Holmes, amazing landscape photographer. Beautiful landscapes, very serene landscapes. I asked him what his inspiration was. Surprisingly, he said it was the Beatles. He went to their very last concert, and it so energized him. And if you know anything about those concerts, you could hardly hear anything because of the screaming that was going on. Plus, it was all being piped through really bad speakers. It's not like modern concerts of today where you have the wall of sound. These were the PA speakers in a stadium that they used to announce, so is on first base. That quality of sound. as opposed to, really high fidelity or stereo sound that we now expect in a concert. But he said that was his inspiration. It just shot him into action as a photographer. You guys, let me ask you this. What's your favorite form of inspiration? What art do you turn to get inspired? My deal, my routine that I love to do, like especially on a Sunday evening at the end of the week, is I'll sit out. We have a porch that looks out over this incredible valley, and trees below. And I'll sit there with a book of maybe from the Museum of Modern Art. I might look at a book. It almost doesn't matter as long as it's got art in it. I might seldom, believe it or not, look at books of photographs. It's mostly about painting or some other art form. It resonates for me. Something sparks. It just does, right? So whatever it is for you, I want you to latch on to that. I want you to remember what it is, and I want you to go to it as your well. Like, this is where you find your inspiration. This is what fills you with inspiration. Go to it often. Don't discount that. Don't do it by accident. Do it on purpose. And use your notebook. Okay? I have so many notebooks around, and I use one constantly. Here's some notes right here. This happens to be an AYP notebook. You guys might not have even known that we created these. This is an actual AYP notebook. And it's got this quote in it from one of my favorite authors, Jack London. Keep a notebook. Travel with it. Eat with it. Sleep with it. Slap into it every stray thought that flutters into your brain. You got to do that, you guys, because these thoughts can just, bam, they go in and they can go out again. I write in my notebook every single morning. First thing I do every morning, I study. What do I study? A lot of things. I study philosophy. I'm going through a whole study of what logic is. How about that? This is the way I percolate, new ideas come up. And then when I've completed that study, I sit down and I write. Sometimes it's one paragraph. Sometimes it's a sentence. Sometimes it's pages. What did I get out of that? What inspired me in the previous day? What, if anything, magical happened? I went, whoa, I shifted something. I had an epiphany. Put it in your notebook. Put it in your notebook. Put it in your notebook. How many of you guys are using a notebook every day? How many of you guys? Put it in the chat. I'm curious. Like, are you using a notebook regularly, at least once a week? That's not often enough. Do it every day. But put in the chat. If you are using a notebook, put a thumbs up. Because I'm telling you guys, it's one of the greatest, simplest tools of creativity ever developed. You've heard Dan Milner. Dan Milner is the notebook guy. I love his notebooks. I mean, he does so much more than just write in it. He pastes pictures in, he does drawings. You can get more elaborate. I just generally write, maybe do a sketch or two, but mostly writing. I want you guys to use your notebook. Okay. Oh, sorry, I can't read your own writing. Oh, tough. I guess you'll have to decipher it. Put it in there anyway. And hopefully sometime you will figure it out. Rachel, good. You got stacks of them. Christian is using them. Yvette, good. I love it, you guys. Well done. Always use your notebook because it is your tool. And by the way, when you go to a museum, take your notebook along with you. Printed on the inside of this notebook are the things you should look for when you're looking at art. How was the subject composed within the frame? How were they lit? Right? The artist used some form of lighting. How were they lit? Where was the light coming from? How did the light strike the subject? These are questions that you want to ask and write in your notebook. Look at each layer. What's in the foreground? What's in the middle ground? What's in the background? What is your eye drawn to when you look at that piece of art? Where does your eye go? The better artists really knew how to control what we call eye trail. It wasn't just random. They drew your eye to a central point. And then maybe there's other parts. Like if you look at Vermeer, he did that all the time. But there's one fundamental center of attention there. And how did the artist use color? These are some of the questions that you want to write in your notebook. We don't want like and dislike. That doesn't tell you anything. You got to dig through that. That's kind of the flaw in our social media, posting. It generally doesn't go beyond like, dislike, or a comment, which is maybe it's got some more information in it. Yvette, you got 2. That's very good. Keep using them. I'm using Google Assistant. I really don't want you to use an electronic device instead of a notebook. It's not the same. We need to give ourselves a break on electronics anyway. So the other thing is, I want to have you guys look at these questions. What does visualization mean to you? You can answer it in the chat, or you can put it in your notebook. I don't want a dictionary definition from you. I want to know what you use. What's your definition? What do you call visualization? How do you think of it? And I want you to write down an example in your own life of your visualization. So that's a little homework, okay? So do that. At the end of every chapter of this book, I have these exercises. They're much longer than this. And so, look, data doesn't mean anything unless you put it to use. It doesn't. This is why I'm not a huge fan of how many books I read these things, these CEOs, blah, 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 they read 12 books a week or something. That is absolutely of no point unless can you put 12 books to work every week? I doubt it. Does the quantity of stuff that's stuffed into your head really make you that much smarter? Or is it the fact that you've evaluated the data and you've used it? Isn't that where the magic comes about? I believe so. I really believe so. So let's get off this idea of just, we're surrounded by too much data already. We're just bombarded with, on the internet, on cable TV, on our phones. It's just a bombardment of information. Is that making us more creative or less creative? You can answer that question. I don't think a fire hose being pointed at you and sprayed with stuff is going to make you more creative. I think sometimes a trickle, sometimes a drop, if it's the right drop and it's the one piece of information you need, can change your whole life. I'm not kidding. Okay. Now, you got to know your tools. And in our case, as photographers, we're using tools like this Leica in the middle. We got to know our lenses. We got to know our exposure. We need to read our histogram. We need to know when we use our exposure compensation, which I use constantly. We need to know that we can control our depth of field and how your lens is going to interpret that, all those things. And what does your photograph look like when it's exposed? What does the image look like? That's knowing your tools. You got to know your tools. And again, there's a variety of tools here. I've used them all one way or another. The elements of style in writing. This is a rock climbing tool. This is for rappelling, going down a mountain. This is a color wheel. I use that all the time to find complementary colors. That's actually really important because you have clashes of colors in your photographs. It's going to feel, okay. Especially if you're looking at a background. What's the background like? Does it really match, your subject, that sort of thing? This is a fin off my surfboard. Anyway, you get the idea. This is my notebook. Use your tools and don't jump around from tool to tool to tool. You just get distracted that way. Know the camera that you've got so well that you know exactly what it's doing and exactly what those photographs are going to do. Get to know it like a close friend. Okay. And then working your craft, that's putting your your vision to work. It's putting your tools to work and blending your visualization with getting it done. Now I'm going to play you this little section. This is Jack London, one of my favorite authors. And he would sit and write every morning. He wrote 1,500 words a day, no matter what. Then he'd go out and play and explore and do all the other stuff he did. But this is his writing setup, his reference work, his writing. He didn't even have a specific desk. He's out here. And he hammered out his 1,500 words every morning. You got to work your craft. Now, David Campbell, we're going to play this conversation. David Campbell, if you don't know him, he's the father of Beck. Beck is an amazing musician. David Campbell is not only a musician himself, he's a conductor, a composer, producer. Here he is producing a group. He has been involved with something like 480 gold and platinum albums. Man, can you imagine that? Just being involved with one. He's won all sorts of Grammys. Amazing guy. I got to make sure that the audio is going to come through here, and I'm not positive of that, so I'm not going to play you the audio. I will give you a highlight from it. I don't want to waste your time and make it frustrating, but I'll tell you what he said here. And again, this is in my book. He said, first of all, when you're creating, do not stop and criticize yourself when you're in the middle of that process. He said there's nothing wrong with self-critiquing yourself, but don't criticize yourself while you're in the process of creating, because sometimes you have to turn the faucet on and out comes dirty water. If you've ever turned on a faucet that hasn't been open for a while, there's often rust and junk. Let that flow out and keep it flowing, but don't do this. Oh, Mark, that really sucks. That image, that photograph is not any good. Oh, I wish I was a better photographer. I'm so stupid, I'm lame. Don't do that. Let it flow. He made this point that when he gets going on something, oftentimes the beginning stuff that comes out isn't that great. He lets it flow. He just lets it flow. And all of a sudden it takes on a kind of a life of its own. I call that getting in the zone. You know the difference when you're out photographing, the difference between sort of being an outsider or a tourist. You know, you're carrying a camera, but you haven't really engaged and gotten involved yet. Maybe you're carrying on a conversation with somebody else. And getting in the zone. When you get in the zone, you got to kind of get away from that and go, I am now a photographer. I am 100% here. I'm looking at everything in detail. I'm not thinking about other stuff. I'm looking for photographs. I'm involved with the scene here. I'm in it. That's called being in the zone. And that's what you have to let happen to your process. You got to get involved in it. And do not do this self-critiquing, criticizing thing while you're producing. Editing is its own stage. That's the next stage in the process. You will edit your work, and you're going to throw away the images that are no good. Who cares? Right? Just let it go. Okay, that's all right. I pressed the shutter at the wrong time and it's blurry or whatever. So what? Let it go. But you got to get into what we call a go flow routine. You got to let it flow. Super important when you guys are out photographing. Let it flow, let it flow, let it flow. Okay. So you guys are talking about your notebooks, I see. That's cool. Using a fountain pen and paper, yep. Fine point. I do. I like fine points. I use fine point pens as well. All right. So we're getting some questions here. Let's take them up. Is mobile photography more difficult than a DSLR? It's weird. I had a dream last night that I was talking to Ed Kashi about using your iPhone versus your DSLR or mirrorless or whatever. And it was such a real conversation. It was kind of amazing. And he said a lot of times he'll just pull out his iPhone because the way it handles light. Okay, that's true. And actually, Bob Holmes and I were talking about this yesterday. Is mobile photography more difficult than a DSLR? I don't think so. I find it much easier, frankly. You know, you still have to process those images, but what I find difficult, though, is controlling. I don't have the control that I have. I know there are apps. You can control aperture and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Look, I enjoy knowing that I can control each part of the exposure with my aperture, my focus, exposure compensation. So if I'm taking a real serious photograph, I'm using a DSLR, but I've taken a lot of photographs with my phone that are professional quality. So it's really up to you. Anyway, it's up to you to decide and answer that for yourself. Okay, what questions do you guys have about your creativity? Now is your chance. Throw your questions in here. I want to know. The most important thing, and I'll just say this, is you got to get out there and be creative. You got to work your craft. You got to do it. Kick yourself in the butt. Don't sit around. Don't let me hear that you didn't have enough time. You know why? Because I wrote a whole chapter. Chapter 8 in here is finding time, making time for your work. I've got specific remedies when you get burnout. One of them is taking a walk every day. Definitely take a walk every day. Part 2 of this book is overcoming barriers to a creative life. Overcoming those barriers. They're going to be there. That's the other thing. Know that there are barriers there. Don't be surprised by them, but you got to overcome them. And the biggest one is time. So I wrote a whole chapter. Make time to create. This tells you how to do that, okay? I'm still not seeing any questions. Okay. So John is saying, when the machine becomes a part of you because you know it so well that you're a part of it and the machine is out of the way and you don't just wonder or work a shot, the zone can be anywhere, be in it. That's true. You got to know your tools so well they just don't get in your way. Very important. By the way, you guys should get a copy of this book, Create. If you don't have it, here's how to get it. I'll put it in the chat. Go to my website. And the book is for sale right there. There's 2 ways you can get it. You can click on the Create button and you can order the book by itself. Or you can click on right next to it, Advancing Your Photography. Get that book at about half price. And also you can get the ebook for Create and my composition book for half price as well. But look, I think I'm selling this for $13.95. I spent years writing this book. I interviewed 12 super highly creative people, like Nancy Cartwright, the voice of Homer Simpson, and like 20 other voices. I talk about Annie Leibovitz, who I went to the San Francisco Art Institute with. I interviewed Chris Burkhardt. If you're not familiar with his stuff on Instagram, he's not just an Instagram photographer, believe me. He's an author of like 6 books. He's a filmmaker, amazingly creative guy. Camille Seaman, who's just outstanding photographer. And anyway, they're all in there, 12 different interviews, plus my own findings. Okay. Paul is asking a question. Do you have one way of editing or do you edit every photo differently? Okay, so remember we got 2 definitions of, technically when you're working with a photograph and you're changing the sliders, that's called processing. So editing is where you're putting your work together. You're deciding what goes in this story, let's say, could be a photo essay. It could be a book. It could be what you put on your wall. You're not going to put every photograph that you ever took on your wall. It could be on your website. One of the biggest mistakes I see with websites is putting too many photographs up. Chase Jarvis says your portfolio should consist of your 10 best images. and just keep switching those out as your images get better. And that's about what your website should have. I have maybe 20, 30, I don't know. I need to update mine. It hasn't been updated for a while. But that's editing. Processing is something different. I think you're asking me about, do I process my photos differently? Not too much. No, I have a pretty set, I'm writing an ebook about it right now. I have a pretty set pattern that I follow. It's in my course, Advancing Your Photography. You'll see me editing. There I go. You'll see me processing images, and I show you basically my workflow in it. And I recommend it because it's very straightforward. One of the things I learned early on studying Ansel Adams is don't keep changing your processing over and over and moving it around all over the place, because you will lose your way. It's very confusing. So I developed a standard, this is in the darkroom I'm talking about, I developed a standard approach to processing, and I pretty much follow that in my digital darkroom. Bear is saying, as silly as it is, I enjoy shooting with my Pentax 110 camera. Am I sacrificing creativity doing a project with a 110 or focusing on that? No, whatever you love. Look, Bear, hey, a 110 camera, that's kind of cool. It works for you. Look, here's the deal. Let me just eliminate all questions about cameras. Here's what a camera is. A camera is a tool. It's a tool. You know, if you're in a kitchen, what do you have? Drawers of knives and spatulas and great cheese graters and whatnot, things to squeeze garlic. Those are just tools. You can't look at a drawer of kitchen utensils and say, that makes a great chef. A great chef might only pick out 3 things out of that drawer. Oh, this is a good knife, I'll use that. Here's a good spatula, I'll use that. You know, they're not using 10 million different things. So you just pick your tools and work with them. That's my best advice. And I don't care what camera it is. I really don't. You could be shooting with this amazing 4x5 camera. This is a Rolleiflex. Sadly, I don't use these cameras ever anymore. This is a Leica. Bob Holmes just got a brand new, well, no, he got a used, he was telling me about it. He just ordered a used Leica M10. You know, he's shot with Leicas for years. He loves Leicas. He's got all these Leica lenses. He's just, he's like a little kid waiting for this thing to be delivered. Okay. I'm not too good at astrophotography, neither am I. I've never taken one astro photograph. I want to, and I should learn how to do it, but I haven't, so I'm not your guy. There's plenty of tutorials out there on astrophotography. I do have that earmarked as something I want to learn, but I just haven't done it. Bear says, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. It's more the person than the tool. That's right. Who's behind the camera? Ask yourself that. Here's your camera, here's your lenses, but who's operating that? That's why your vision is so important. Your visualization is the senior thing here, because you're the person behind the lens. All right. So, Jared Mills, if there's anything I need that I've forgotten about, make sure you don't miss his question. Where is it? Omer. See, normally I'd have Jared. Where is it, Jared? Okay, here it is. I want to make sure I don't miss it, but I missed it. I'm going up back here. Am I seeing it? Oh, here. There's your question. Isn't creativity something you either have or not? Learning to be creative seems to be a contradiction. Absolutely not. It's not a contradiction at all. In fact, one of the reasons I want to interview these 12 amazing people is to find out how they became creative. It's a complete falsehood that you're either born with creativity or not. Okay, some people are more creative than others, but we are all born with the power to visualize and be creative. And it is something that you can strengthen. Doesn't it make sense? Are we all born as long-distance runners? No, not necessarily. You had to decide to go out and run, but are you born having the capability of being a long distance runner? Unless you don't have legs, and even then, we see the Special Olympics, they do other things, They're still moving, they're still racing, they're still competing. So what you have to do is look at it like this. And that is a complete falsehood. I'm sorry. I'm pretty adamant about that. And I'm not kidding. I get a little irritated, not at you, but at this myth that you're either born with this creative gene or not. That is such a crock of BS. Don't buy that. And yes, you can strengthen it. Absolutely. Knowledge is power. If you think you can't, guess what happens? If your idea is I cannot be creative, or I'm not born with this creativity, you will sabotage yourself. Don't do that. That is a strong point, and I'm really adamant about it, and I'm not kidding. This is why I interviewed 12 different people. Are they the chosen ones? Did they come out of some special mold? Okay, they had talent. But they took that talent and they escalated it. They expanded it. They augmented it. They followed that passion and they developed it. And like anything, you have to learn it. Bob Hums was not born a photographer. He talks about he started out as an architect. And he started doing landscape works, and he said it wasn't that great. It just wasn't. How did he develop his skills? He did, and he became a National Geographic photographer. But that was out of nothing. He didn't go to art school. He didn't study photography. He trained himself. And whether you go to school somewhere or you take one of my courses, which I recommend because it'll save you years of trying to figure it out on your own, you've got to take that creative urge and let it grow. All right, guys. I think I've said enough. Let me just see if there's any other questions here before we sign off. And are there any questions? I'm not seeing any. Okay, there's a lot of stuff you guys are saying here. What next camera should I buy? A D7000, D500, or D750? I have no idea. I have no way to answer that question. I'm sorry. I'm not a gearhead. I couldn't give you any piece of advice about any one of those cameras. You can go, if you want to know about gear, I do recommend my friend Ken Rockwell, and go to his site and see what he says about those. Okay. Truthfully, probably any one of those cameras will serve you well. So just look at what the camera does and doesn't do and make up your mind after that. Practice something which invokes creativity every day. I completely agree with that. Find that thing that helps you spark your creativity, whatever it is. I go for walks every day. You got to do that. Absolutely. Just get out there no matter how tired you are, or how cold it is, or whatever. Even if it's raining, put on a rain hood. Rain is kind of cool to walk through. Beth Ann says, I think we forget just how many hours, months, and years artists, musicians, athletes, etc. actually practice. Yes, we only get to see the end result, which is still in progress. That's so friggin' true. It's hours and hours and hours of practice as opposed to the end result. Right? Like in sports. These guys who are running, their Olympic trials, how long does the race last? 10 seconds? 2 minutes? Depending on the length. And how many hours did they put into practicing to get them to that point where they won the race? Yeah, don't forget. Okay, 20 below zero. Listen, I have walked in 40 below zero. It's uncomfortable. I know what it's like. My first trip to Vermont, when I came from California, I was walking around in jeans and 40 below, and I realized my legs were going numb. And I went, nah, these are not the right pants to wear out in that kind of weather. Wow, in Brazil, 35 degrees centigrade, which I thinking it's in the 90 to 100 range. Yeah, it's hot. Please do a session on Lightroom editing. I could do that. Especially now I'm creating this ebook, which you guys will have access to if you want it. Okay, guys, I could talk to you all day. Thank you for joining me. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already done so. Enable the bell. I really appreciate you guys being here, being part of our community. If you don't mind liking and leaving your comments, this will become a shortened version. Jared will edit it and put it up. You can watch out for that. And we always have new short videos going up all the time. Leave your comments. Keep leaving your comments. Capture life, yes. Don't forget. I was going to say that. Okay. Remember, you guys, say this with me. Okay. Remember to get out and capture your own images of life, or shorten it down to just capture life. I love it. Thank you, guys. Love seeing you here. Stay creative. Keep sparking your interest. See you soon.